In Jackson Hole, Wyoming, enterprising cider makers saw that in order to save bears, the key was to make cider. And that is exactly what they started to do, making them be the first commercial cidery in the state. And you're going to hear all about it with Ian McGregor of Farmstead Cider in this here episode 311 of Cider Chat.
Hey, apples, make them pop. Pop, 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 pop.
Hey, my name is Rhea Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world.
Hip, hip, hooray!
Tip of the glass to Tim, who just became the most recent patron via the Cider Chat Patreon page. He wrote, I found your podcast 2 months ago. It has exceeded my every expectation. Thanks for the work you put into this. I'm a podcaster myself, so I know how much effort it takes to produce a show every week. And by the way, his podcast is called Future of Agriculture, and I will put a link in the show notes. It is available on Spotify. He continues with, I am from an agricultural background and have worked in ag consulting for the past 7 years. Recently, I have been wanting to invest in 20 to 50 acres here in southwest Idaho and potentially grow cider apples. I'm very new to cider making myself, but I wonder if there might be a market among cider makers for juice from certain varieties of apples. I would say to that, yes, and yes. You didn't ask 3 questions there, but it's just yes. People are always interested in cider apples. And definitely there's been some orchards that have started on this quest going back a couple years now. But we obviously need more and more apples that are really specific to a certain blending of juice for making cider. So yeah, do it. We do not have enough orchards of that. That is my 2 cents, and I'm sticking to it. Anyways, he also continues on with, I like dry ciders, but I enjoy trying as many different ciders as I can. Thanks again for your wonderful podcast. I am glad to be a patron. And Tim, we are glad to have you at the Cider Chat Patreon page. And you folks out there in Ciderville, you too can become a patron by just Googling Cider Chat at Patreon, and Patreon spelled Patreon. I want to say hello to all the new folks who are listening to Cider Chat the first time. Kind of like Tim, maybe you just found Cider Chat and could be feeling perhaps a little bit overwhelmed because you might not have realized, holy crapoly, this is like not just a U.S. thing, cider. This is a worldwide rolling apple, just filled with amazing fermentations globally, and so many different voices in the cider sphere, or what I lovingly call Ciderville. And everybody has their special spot of Ciderville. In fact, last week's episode with Hannah Ferguson at the Dope Cider House and Winery, which is going to be coming online in Youngstown, Ohio, I loved how Hannah was just so transparent. I mean, coming into fermentation, she didn't have like the agricultural background like Tim. She was just going at it from the fermentation perspective, right? And able to get those resources to ferment wine and to also ferment and make beer. And now she's going full on into cider. And like Hannah, there's a lot of folks out there, and perhaps that might be you. And I would even put myself in that little drawer, right, of always kind of searching and learning. I feel like an absolute beginner in cider. I really do. I've been doing this podcast. It's gone on for 7 years. I've been making cider for more years than I would like to count out loud. But, it's going on to I don't know, it's going to be probably 30 years. And still, it's just such an amazing craft. It never ends. And staying in the beginner's mind is a good thing. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, just join the crowd. We're kind of all overwhelmed with life and world events and everything that's going on. And I hope that you feel welcomed into this 1 hour time that we share here with Cider Chat to just kind of flip the switch and delve into just a beautiful world that's filled with a real appreciation for handcrafted products that really bring you to another level of your taste where you might not have been before, because that's what a cider can do, such as the one we're going to be talking about this week with Ian McGregor. They are using natural yeast. They don't use any sulfites, and they are foraging all the apples. I don't even know what they are, the varieties. But enough about that. I'm going to save that featured conversation. But getting to the point, I just want to welcome you and just hang out in the space. You don't have to be an expert. We're going to always have a little bit of something for everyone and keep the playing field level. And if you ever have a question about cider, feel free to send it my way. Send it to info@ciderchat.com. And I have a little bit more on that coming up, because you have more opportunity to ask very specific questions about fermentation. So stay tuned, and I'll get right to that after this pause. Our good friend Soon from Denmark sent in a question for the upcoming interview with Fermentis that I'll be recording for an upcoming episode, all on yeast. And Fermentis at fermentis.com is all about yeast. So if you're looking for a balanced, sweet, dry cider, something with aromatics, they have a whole array of cider making yeast. So you could check them out at fermentis.com. And soon, the kind of question that he sent in was all about malolactic bacteria, MLB. He was specifically wondering about the timing of the inoculation of MLB and its influence on malolactic fermentation. Now, you might not know what that means, and that's totally fine. If you enjoy cider, drinking cider, don't worry about malolactic fermentation. For someone like myself who enjoys making cider, even as a hobby, I actually do like taking my ciders through a process called malolactic fermentation, because it kind of changes the mouthfeel. I'm not really drawn to high acid ciders. Okay, that's just my preference. Yours might be very different. In fact, I know so many people that just love high acid. In fact, the folks down at Albemarle Cider Works, they love it. I was talking to Chuck Shelton in past interviews, or even David Timmerman, who's down there assisting Chuck. They love it. And frankly, what they do with their ciders and how they turn around with the acid there, I love it too, what they do with it. But, for my own preference, I like to go with a little malolactic fermentation when I can for a particular cider. So we're going to be putting that question in the queue. And if you have a question for Fermentis that you would like for me to ask them during the interview, start sending those questions my way. Send that to info@ciderchat.com. And in the meanwhile, to check out what Fermentis is all about and how they are making yeast for producers internationally, go to fermentis.com.
Walking through the orchards.
A wonderful family-owned company out of Slovenia is also sponsoring Cider Chat. And if you've listened to the past couple of episodes, you have heard me talking to Dennis Keebler, who is a marketing director at Schrammel. And they make cider-making equipment, so the production equipment, the grinder, the presses, the canning. Recently, we've been looking at the difference between using a belt press versus a pneumatic press. Without a doubt, whether you have a belt press or a pneumatic press, you're still going to be able to make cider. It just becomes a little factor of kind of tweaking it out a bit. So with the belt press, you don't have as much flexibility as the pneumatic press. You're likely to get a little bit more solids in your finished juice that you get, which can be managed, no doubt about it. Lots of fantastic makers using a belt press, which Schrammel provides. Or if you go with a pneumatic press, you have a little bit more flexibility, and you can kind of tweak it out a bit. Plus, you get like the pulp itself in the press creates like a thick cake, which acts like a filter for the juice, so you do get less solids. And the gentle pressing from the pneumatic press, it should be noted, will extract more from fruits which are soft and difficult to press. And we know who we're talking about there. We're talking about pears. Really, like it's endless. So that's why you want to contact Schrammel to get the final detail. But in the end, I just want to ask you, Dennis, what do you think?
What's better, belt or pneumatic? There is no definitive answer, and there is no right or wrong. It all depends on the cider maker's decision on what kind of cider he wants to produce. Gaining control over the quality and the taste of the juice is the key for a good cider.
Yeah, it all comes down to what kind of cider you want to make. So contact the folks at Schrammel, and it is spelled S-R-A-M-L. Go to schrammel.com. Once again, that's SRAML.com.
Perfect.
Up next is our featured conversation with Ian McGregor of Farmstead Cider in Wyoming. This cidery is actually based just outside of Jackson Hole, which is a huge mega destination for visitors to Grand Tetons National Park and Jackson Hole proper. Ian and co-owner Orion Bellorado both saw an opportunity to basically save bears. In fact, the cidery was originally called Bear Traps Cider Works, but then was renamed to Farmstead Cider because really they're not trapping bears, they are saving bears. But there's a whole bunch more to this cidery, which has won multiple cider awards most recently. So let's all grab a glass and join this chat with Ian McGregor of Farmstead Cider based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I first met you in person on the Monterey Cider Tour in CiderCon in 2020, and then that really, kind of said, this is such a nice guy. I really got to find out what he is doing, and I've been cider curious about what you're doing out in Wyoming, which is, I'm going to say, you're the first Wyoming cider maker that is on the podcast.
It's an honor.
And aren't you one of the first commercial cider makers in the state?
I think we're currently the first and only still.
Okay.
I'm kind of hoping that changes, and I've heard some rumblings of different folks trying. And actually today we met some other people who have ambitions to start a cidery in Wyoming, and they're planting trees right now and just kind of in the preliminary stages. So I really hope to have more of a community, to be honest, to be a part of. Something that I've really come to enjoy about this and trying to go to more cider festivals, although the pandemic was poor timing to get excited about that. I'm looking forward to that because I do feel like we operate in a vacuum a lot, and I miss that community portion of it all.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, it's good to have people you could call up at any time of day who are kind of local to you. But you're in a really vibrant area. You're in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So for folks who are listening, on the other side of the world right now, can we give an image of coming to your cidery, what that actually looks like? And I'm going to first give you my idea.
Yeah.
I'm thinking you're not on top of the mountain, but you got big mountains out there, right?
You got it, yeah.
And maybe I might be able to see snow cap in the distance for a good part of the year.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got this kind of potentially dry kind of western air scene, and people are very outdoorsy and friendly, and I want to hear a little bit about the food too that's out in Jackson Hole, but that's kind of the hip town. It's like a hipster town, isn't it?
Totally. Well, it's one of those places. I grew up there. I was born and raised there, and then I had to leave Jackson to really start to appreciate it, because when it's all then you take it for granted immediately. But I went to college in upstate New York, and actually, that was when I first got a glimpse into the apple world. To be near orchards for the first time I could feel it click with my soul. I grew up working, in Jackson, Wyoming, and I would be a part of brandings and, cattle wrangling seasonally here and there, and I didn't click with that form of agriculture at all. It just wasn't. Livestock and open range has a romanticism to it, but it just didn't click with me. And then when I was able to leave and experience other versions of the agricultural world, then I felt those clicks come into place. And so by the time I made it back to Jackson in 2014, I was really prepared to, I had gone on a journey of both farming and fermentation, and was ready to bring that back to a place where there weren't so many people doing it. And, it's nice to have community around you, but in a way it's also nice to be out on your own and feel like sometimes you're nervous about whether you're doing something right or not and don't have many people to bounce things off of, but in a way that's freeing. And it was a big part of what made us start making cider. I was going to just start a farm, and I teach culinary and agricultural education to kids. So we play in the garden in the mornings during our summer camps and then cook with the food that we've picked in the afternoons. And there's just a great connection that kids can really feel as well. Something that I've always felt pretty much since moving to New York and being in an actual orchard setting. But yeah, our cidery is it's kind of a cross between an urban cidery in the sense that we had to find a commercial zone where it was legal to do it. There's not many laws for how to do something or not do something in Wyoming, and so a lot of it has been telling the town that we would like to do this thing and them making up regulations for us, and that's been a trick. So we're in a really cool little commercial area near my house, south of town, away from the tourist artery that is, from the airport through the town of Jackson and up into Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks. We kind of are just outside of that, so it's nice and quiet from the buzz of the trendy sort of buzz in town that it is. But tourists will make the trek out, and lots of locals make the trek out. It's only a 5-minute drive south of town. And, it's called Jackson Hole for a number of reasons, but I think the one that connects with most people is that we're surrounded by mountains on all sides, and so it feels like you're in a hole. You look around and all you see is a different butte or mountain, or eventually you see the Tetons, and the cathedral group of the Tetons is always, for the most part, snow-capped, although less and less in the late summers these days. So there's a very picturesque spot. We're kind of elevated, we can see out over the valley, and my favorite part about our location is because we forage so many of the apples that we use, we're interacting in neighborhoods with homeowners to pick these apples. And from our cidery location, you can look out over a number of these neighborhoods. And I tell people these are our orchards. We don't have any orchard culture really here or history of growing commercial orchard fruit in Jackson, but all these homeowners have planted different varieties of crab apples and dessert apples, and some of them have done really well, and they've proven their ability to survive in our climate over the 50 years that they've been there.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, it's been a glimpse into which varieties are really hardy and what traits to look for that can handle where we live, and not just survive, but actually thrive there. So that's a big part of it.
Right. Well, that's interesting. So do you have an orchard, though, at this point?
We've been planting and grafting trees for the last 5 years, starting really small with a handful, and then last year I grafted around 400 trees.
Well, what are some of the varieties that are thriving?
Well, that's the thing is we don't know most of them. And most of them are crab apples, but we don't know the varieties, and I've never taken I'm hoping to this in the next couple of weeks actually try and send off a genetic analysis, but a lot of folks I've talked to here especially have said, well, you may never know what the variety is. Dolgo crabapple is super common in our area as a landscaping tree.
Well, that's fantastic. That's a major score right there.
Yeah, that's probably our most common fruit. So that's a really nice, and when we first discovered it, I was like, oh, this is battery acid. Maybe we can't do anything with this. But
God, what do you mean? Wait, just for folks listening, when you say battery acid, when you're biting into it, it's like, huge.
You have visions of dental bills immediately. That's how I think of it, You can just see the dental bill arriving after you bite into that apple.
But to be fermented.
Yeah.
An amazing just juice unto its own, just like, I'm kind of curious because there's a friend nearby, New Salem Orchard. They have like one Dolgo, crabapple tree, and they sell in those like little quart bottles of juice. It's just people like covet it.
The fresh stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it has all that sweetness, they're coming in at 18 bricks, sometimes even 19 bricks. And so it's hard to taste the sweetness when you bite into it, but when you press it off, somehow the sweetness can stand out a lot more. Crazy. Then it starts to ferment, and you're like, oh no, it's getting it's being more and more damaging to my enamel, and then when it's dry, because everything we do is, we've been really focusing on dry ciders, getting as close to dry as we can, and then eventually, letting it take the time to get dry, no matter how long it takes. But also, we've been using native yeast pretty much exclusively since about 3 years ago, when we just switched after doing a few batches and saying none of the commercial yeasts could survive in our cold cellar. It was 20 below zero the other day, and we had a cold snap, and that's actually not that cold. When I was growing up, it used to always be 30 below for a week in January, and we haven't seen that in the last 10 years, really. But we still get 20 below regularly, and the cellar, we could heat it, but I like thinking that the cellar can experience some of the changes that the seasons are offering. So we've always let it get cold, but when we would let it get down to 45 or 45 degrees or so, the commercial yeasts would really slow down and shut down and not be very healthy. And I did a few practice batches with just letting the native yeast on the apples do their thing. And I was amazed how it would hum along when the cellar was getting down 45, 40 degrees. Sometimes I come into the cellar and it's 39, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm approaching freezing. I got a heater near the water and the sinks and everything, but I kind of love the idea that the ciders are experiencing what we're experiencing outside. Not totally as much, but they feel that big swing down and cool down. So ever since I learned that the native yeast could keep humming along at those temperatures, we've gone 100%.
100% native yeast, yeah. So backing up a little bit, here you are foraging the fruit. Like, that's an immense amount of work.
Yeah, it can be, for sure.
Did you?
Super fun, but it's intense.
Oh, well, okay. So It sounds like you have a pretty easygoing attitude about it. Or are there days where you're like, holy smokes, we need our,
Yeah.
What did I think I was doing? Because you have dove in now. You have a tasting room. You have, a cidery, and that has a certain expectation that, kind of knowing you a little bit that I do, you're gonna meet that demand. So how do you keep that up to be able to produce enough to sustain as a business model?
Yeah. So I mean, our foraging story is interesting. It comes from a mistake, really. I was in the wine industry for maybe 5 or 6 years, around starting in 2009 and then ending 2014, and then dabbled a little bit before that. Made my first cider in 2009 with some cider that was just brought near us, and I was living with a British gentleman, and he was all about cider, and I was really interested in fermenting it, and we put it in the fridge to cold crash it, and all that was very fun. But when I moved back to Wyoming from California, there was sort of a moment of maybe my fermentation dreams are over, and I wanted to focus on farming and kids, education and culinary and agricultural education. But I couldn't help but see all this fruit everywhere that I didn't see before when I didn't have the grower's lens to look through. But I started noticing dessert fruit growing in our community, which was kind of unheard of at all. So we focused on that at the first, in 2014 and 15, we focused on harvesting dessert fruit. It wasn't until my business partner, Orion, went to dinner with someone who is involved with the fish and game as a bear biologist, did we discover there's a huge issue with crab apples attracting bears into our residential neighborhoods. And it's really expensive to remove a bear, but we decided that we would submit a grant application to the town of Jackson to offer to remove the attractant. Since no one could convince the homeowners to cut the tree down, the idea was maybe we could harvest the fruit from it. And so for 3 years, we set it up so we wanted to try and see if we could build a business model over 3 years that would allow us to stop using public funds to pick these apples, and we'd be incentivized on our own to go out and remove the apples in areas where bears are a challenge. And because of that, it wasn't like go into this neighborhood and look for nice dessert fruit. It was you have to remove all the fruit in this whole neighborhood.
Oh my goodness.
And so we went out and we're hitting, we're shaking trees, and then we start thwacking trees because some of these crab apples are persistent and they hang on the
really
tree
hold
and they
on,
don't want to
yeah.
let go. We've learned all these little techniques. Now we use these 16-foot poles with a bike hook that you'd hang your bike in the garage,
Oh yeah.
screwed into the end like a panking stick with a hook on the end, and we'll hook it on there and vibrate it or shake
The branch,
stick.
you would vibrate.
Yeah.
You'd hook the branch and vibrate. Oh, that's brilliant.
So it would, shake those persistent ones off more effectively. So we had to figure out those things, but we were incentivized via the grant. The other great thing about that is I had to push through the fact that I thought the apples tasted horrible. I had to push past that and say, I'm spending all the time to harvest this. We need to experiment with it. We need to try and see what happens. And we got some wine barrels from the wineries I used to work in, and they use malolactic fermentation and other sorts of tricks to help change the acidity flavor profile. And once we started experimenting, and more importantly, once we let those ciders age, they suddenly transformed. And that transformation made us suddenly look at our urban orchards completely differently and realize how many different fruits were out there with all these different characteristics. And I thank the bears for that, because we would have probably continued to pursue dessert fruit exclusively without having the exposure to other crabapple cider producers or the European ciders to realize that tannins and acids can be played with more. And so that was a real gift. And now we go out and we've created something called the Harvest Helper, where community members who have an apple tree and want it to be picked can submit their information and submit their permission. And it builds out a map for us. And we've got 500 trees in Jackson that we can harvest if they have fruit.
Mainly being crab apples, like what folks thought for ornamental kind of the blossoms, and they're probably happy it's gone. Not just for the bears. I know the bears are a big piece, but you got a lot on the ground eventually, and that could be a nuisance.
People rejoice when we show up now. And there are a handful of homeowners that want to see the fruit hang. A lot of them want to see the birds get it, and we're happy, or they use it. Maybe they make applesauce or something like that.
Yeah.
And we just want to see people interact with their trees and care about their trees, and so we don't give any pressure there. We let the bears put the pressure on, because...
And we're talking big bears.
Yeah.
These are grizzly bears, aren't they?
Yeah, it was predominantly black bears for years and years since I was a kid that would be a problem in neighborhoods. But the grizzly population has rebounded a lot throughout my 35-year lifespan. And we've been getting grizzly bears pretty regularly now.
Yeah.
And there's a very famous bear named Bear 399 who had 4 cubs 2 years ago. And she's well known because she interacts with humans well. She doesn't tend to get in trouble by getting into trash cans and things like that. And so she's always out and about, and she's the most famous one because everyone takes her photograph. But 2 years ago, she came out with 4 cubs, came out of hibernation with 4 cubs.
Is this a grizzly?
And she's a good-sized grizzly.
She's a grizzly bear.
Yeah.
Miss 399.
That's right, Miss 399, a very romantic name given by Fish and Game, I think, or at least or the Park Service, maybe.
Well, somehow, because it's a bear, it immediately sounds romantic. I don't know why, but it does.
Yeah, well, she has captivated people's minds, and then
he's showing me a photo right now.
Her bears have grown up.
Oh my goodness!
Her 4 cubs are all big grizzlies now.
I am looking at a photo that Ian just handed me, and it is a small crabapple tree, and the trunk is very low to the ground. The branches go out from there, and there are 4 little cubs. Not little cubs. I would say they're kind of more than a couple months old.
Those are 2 years. They're a year and a half.
Okay,
plus.
Year and a half plus grizzly.
They're big bears.
Cubs, and looks like Mrs. 399 is off to the side there in the sunlight. This is a phenomenal photo. Was that at one of your
your sites, or was that your own?
Yeah, no, this was at one of the locations in Jackson, and it was sent to us from the person who lives there.
Wow.
It's actually a live photo, so if you click it, you can see her.
Oh yes, they're moving around.
Harvesting. And
wow.
She's honestly made our community care about coexisting with bears. Something that was part of our business when we got started. We want people to coexist with the wildlife around us. And I think of that as coexisting with anything from bears to birds. Sometimes, with all the traffic and tourism, the wildlife can be exploited a little bit as something just to see and take a picture of and go. But we live with them, and we want to live with them and not have our negligence be their demise, leaving our trash can out and things like that. And so the apple story, so getting back to your original question, we got started foraging doing that, got really excited about working with all this unique fruit, but honestly I look forward to visiting these homeowners every year, and I show up and I drive around and people know me now and they'll tell me of new trees, or there's all this great synergy that is why I wanted to move back to my hometown and wanted to continue to live in a smaller town. And I get a lot of gratification every fall. I do get exhausted for sure. But, it's one of those things where you build up towards it all year, and then you get in the thick of it and you get your head down and grind with work, and then you get to take a break and relax. Thankfully in Jackson, we do eventually get a cold snap that is going to knock out whatever fruit's still hanging if we haven't gotten to it. And it can be sad because maybe we missed some trees, but it happens every year and we don't ever get them all. But it is a hard stop on the workload.
He said smilingly, it's like, I could finally take a break.
I see those, I see that 12-degree night up in the forecast, and I work exceptionally hard until then, but I'm excited to see that number usually in October.
So in October. So that's what I was wondering, when would that be? Because you do have a much colder climate than I do in New England.
Yeah.
It drops down. People go to Jackson Hole to go to the national park, of course, which is just a couple miles out from there.
Yeah.
But, skiing, right? It's a big thing. So in October, like when does the season begin?
Yeah, we usually get started with yellow transparent, which is maybe not the best cider apple ever, but they're very common in homestead plantings, and that's why we named our business Farmstead, because everybody's house can be a farmstead. You can have a small little garden and produce a ton of food, and everyone thinks farm needs to be a big place, and it doesn't have to be. Mm-hmm. But we also were harvesting trees where the house that was there, or the shed or shack, has long since fallen down and rotten away. But the trees they planted are still there. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure in New England there's a lot of similarities with that. Sure. But, out in Wyoming, when you just see a big apple tree standing there, it's almost certainly not a seedling. There weren't enough apples around to have a seedling that big, so you almost know that someone planted that there as a means for survival.
Right.
Yellow transparent was super popular in that era, applesauce and the like.
Sure was, yeah.
And it also helps get us started slowly but surely. We can go hit all the yellow transparent, get all of our gear cleaned and organized and pack the truck right, and then we can go pick transparents and get started. And then there's a little bit of a lull. Maybe Lodi's also, we've been discovering some Lodi's that do well. Neat. And they're in the similar sort of vein as yellow transparent, I believe. But then we've started picking other fruits like tart cherries, and choke cherries are as a native fruit that I think that we're really excited about. Last year we made our first real effort and picked what ended up being 30 gallons worth of choke cherry juice. But they're tiny little cherries with huge pits that are really, really tannic and pretty high in sugar, 22 bricks. And so we have this lull between the transparents. We can go out and pick those other fruits, and the more fruits we discover, the more we'll fill in the gaps. But then about second week of September, then things really start going. And I'm just usually cruising around on my bicycle, checking fruit with the iodine test or a refractometer, and trying to put out a schedule of what's going to be ripe when, and can we get to it? And then the Dolgos, they need to get frosted a few times, and once the frosts start to hit, then the Dolgo avalanche begins. And you have to just go
Avalanche.
from
I
sun
love
up
that.
to sundown.
That's like I don't know what, a rock band name, but
it should be. Yeah,
Dolgo Avalanche is in town.
And it'd be like the acidity would be matched by the music's intensity. But
Heavy metal.
they those having all the different varieties, we have to sometimes we just encounter one and it's one we haven't picked before, or we'll pick a lot in between with things that maybe I'll say we won't go up there even though that variety is ripe, even though we don't know the names, we can identify the shape. And I'll say we'll get that when we get up there for the Dolgos or something like that. So there's a lot of running around. We've gone over the hill, which is 25, 30 minute to an hour drive over into Idaho, and then there's a better climate. So once the frosts start to hit Jackson area, we'll start driving over to Idaho and picking over there, letting those Dolgos ripen as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And then when the really cold snap comes, then finally it'll toast everything. But
When you're going to Idaho, are you going to residential homes again?
Yeah.
Same situation for saving the bears. Make cider, save the bears.
And it's come down to bears, but also moose are a big one.
Okay.
And then I mentioned birds earlier. Honestly, we hear so many stories of birds eating fermented crab apples and then crashing into windows. And it's one of those things where it's nice that they eat the fruit in your yard and you can watch them, but it is still, it's not a natural environment for them to be consuming that. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of forage for them out in the forest, but I find that a lot of people are open to the idea that we're helping protect wildlife from eating fruit that habituates them to a more human-driven landscape. And that is something that I think applies well in Jackson and maybe not everywhere else because we have so much wild land around us that it's even more important to make sure those animals engage with the wild spaces. Out in more populated regions of the country, it's probably a great gift for those animals to be able to have access to that food. And it's a different type of human-animal relationship. But with the fact that 95% of our community is public land and is wildland, we want to keep those animals there as much as possible.
Sure, no doubt.
So it kind of in Idaho it's a similar feeling. But also there's unbelievable trees there. We harvested a tree that I couldn't reach around. And I have long arms.
Yeah, you're a big guy. You're tall. You're like 6 foot something.
Yeah, 6'4" at a pretty good reach and terrible at basketball. But like
good at making cider.
yeah, or try to get better at it. But no, we picked over 2,000 pounds of apples from one tree, and it was sitting in this family's front yard. That family had lived there for 50 years, but the tree was clearly much older than that. And they had never once tried one of those apples. They'd cleaned them up every year, and they'd never tried them. And honestly, they're one of the most delicious apples. It's a dessert apple that's growing in that area. I don't know what it's called yet. I think I'm going to be able to find out which one that one is.
I bet you would through the genetic, DNA testing.
But they'd never tried it. And then they said, why would you want this? And then I said, taste it. And they said, are you sure it's okay to eat? And I was like, absolutely. And it's an evidence of the relationship with food that has gone, I'd say, a negative direction across the spectrum. And so they took a bite, passed it around the family, and they said, these are really good. We'd love to make some pies. And so they took, 30 pounds, and then we took 1,970 pounds.
Oh my goodness, off of one tree.
From one tree.
And that's an old tree, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And
surprisingly healthy. Really showed no signs of degradation at a trunk, biggest trunk I've ever seen, and it was still
So I'm wondering, what about the upkeep of the trees themselves? Is anyone pruning these trees, or is this now fallen into your hands to do the pruning?
I'm like a pruning advisor.
A pruning
advisor.
Okay.
I will.
That's a good job.
It's not a consult. We don't do it. We do it as a trade for the apples. We never pay for the apples because we put in so much work to harvest them, and we want people to realize that there's a service happening that's benefiting multiple layers. And most people are totally happy because they don't have to clean up the fallen apples. And so the trade is, we'll take them away so you don't have to clean them up. But I often do some big pruning when we're there and there's dead limbs. We have saws in the truck and we'll scamper up there and cut out some branches that might be hard for people, or especially if some older generations are. It's smart of them to not go up in the tree and start messing with it. I can get up there and pull some things out.
Yeah.
And then I'll help say, you guys should consider pruning a little bit. You can always prune out the dead wood, and that's a great place to start, and you don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
We'll keep clippers on us and prune out things while we're harvesting sometimes.
How big are the trees? Because, a crabapple doesn't necessarily get to be the size of a Baldwin tree, on a standard rootstock.
It's kind of amazing. I never know what rootstock they're on or what the story is. No one knows much about their trees in that area. They're ornamental and were usually planted by someone else. But we see trees that get up to they're up to, I'd say, the oldest trees in the town of Jackson that we harvest are over 75 years old. And they are maybe 25 feet tall and pretty sprawling, pretty spreading. I'm thinking of Dolgos.
Yeah.
And they have been pruned off and on throughout their lives by, say, a landscaping team.
Which probably was a good thing, right? Having that urban orchard scene. In that way, there was always a little bit of pruning that happened initially by the enterprising person who planted it, or they had landscapers, right?
Or it's gotten so overgrown that the new owners just want to kind of see it tidied up, so they'll hire someone to prune it. So it's that urban interface, by being close to humans, they've been engaged a number of times in that 75-year window, and those trees will give us between 500 and 700 pounds of fruit on a big year, and they're very biennial. So,
that's very impressive.
Yeah, they can have a massive yield.
Do you have to worry about pesticides on the lawns or anything like that? Because that's the other piece that would happen in an urban setting.
We definitely are. Because we interface with all the homeowners, we'll have a conversation initially. And we've turned away a few spots, but we haven't. Pretty much, crab apples are successful because you can neglect them. And when you'll find homeowners that do spray their lawns, let's say they're spraying for dandelion or things like that, but unfortunately, these trees are almost never in a lawn. They're always over some other planting or some railing or over the driveway. And I'm sure that some residual spray could blow through there, but I have to sort of pick my battles. And I've realized that if you're going to round up dandelions in your yard, I'm okay with that. Most of that happens in the spring, and but that's why we can't make any claims for organic. But we say that they're clean by neglect, and nobody's spraying them for any reason to help the tree. In terms of help or hurt, it's hard to say, but to maintain fruit quality or anything like that. And then fertilizer would be the other thing that some places do. They'll fertilize their lawns, and I'm sure some of that bleeds through. But I can count on my hands how many trees are actually in a lawn. Unfortunately, it's so much nicer to harvest there with our tarps and our sticks. But that's why we stopped using ladders. I fell out of a ladder, and it was surprisingly very uninjured from a tall ladder. I got real lucky.
Oh, dear.
That was some years ago, and I said, and they're just so difficult in these urban settings that we switched strictly to the poles and tarps and bungee cords so we can make little actual avalanches. The apples fly out of there as we shake them, and then they run down the watershed of a tarp that's hanging by.
You got it down. You got your systems all down. Wow.
Yeah, it's gotten fairly quick, although it's much slower than traditional orchard setting.
Whatever traditional is, depending on who you talk to, right?
Right.
I mean, this is such a. I knew that you were doing this to save the bears, but I didn't realize the extent of it, and I'm just so impressed by your story. And I know that folks probably listening in Ciderville right now are like going, holy crap, like it might inspire other people to just kind of look around. And I know it will inspire other people to look around maybe in a different light. You do have this benefit, though, of having, like Dalgo, crab apples are just highly prized, highly prized for that.
Yeah.
So going to your ciders here, there's like 3 ciders on the table in front of us in this beautiful cork and cage. Is your presentation how you do that? What percentage are crab apples in here?
Yeah.
Because 100% crab apple would be, I don't know. Tell me how would it be?
Certainly. Well, the first thing I would want to say to Ciderville in general is that crab apples are so amazingly diverse in their flavors that you can find every flavor out there. And so the 2 smaller bottles in front of us are 100% crab apple, but there's over 20 different varieties of crab apple in there. And Dolgo features heavily in some of our blends. In fact, these are focused on a little bit more of a diversity than, say, we do have one blend called Raptor J because the neighborhood of Raptor J was developed in the 70s over a 10-year period, and it was landscaped with Dolgos because they were in vogue at that time. Whereas in the town of Jackson, developed over a much longer period of time, much more slowly, and all these different trees from different eras.
Whoever the landscape artist was at the time who had the hankering for this or that.
And whatever nursery they knew that had connections to a tree that could survive in our climate. My parents used to see 40 below regularly, and so these trees, most of them that we've harvested have survived 40 below.
Talk about terroir, man. You have this living museum in your town of what is cold hardy. These ornamental trees that are also edible are surviving in this extreme climate. I mean, that is just tremendous. I mean, this is like terroir.
That's what we've been feeling like. And honestly, we've been nervous that our terroir is too intense. But at the same time, as time has been able to go on and as we've been able to learn more about it, I think we can harness the flavors that are available more effectively as we get better at.
What do you mean the terroir is too intense?
Well, high acidity and high tannin and high sugar. We've seen 22 bricks on a couple of crabs that we harvest regularly, and we'll see between 17 and 20 all the time with the crabs. And so it's higher alcohol, it's higher everything. The cold nights.
Well, what is the alcohol level that you're typically hitting at then? In fermentation.
So we've got them all listed at 7.5, and they all tend higher than that. And we really embrace the 1.5% leeway that regulators allow. But that's sort of the window, like 7.5 to 9, and
still lower than wine.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's what cider. The beauty of it is. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, you can have
2 glasses.
Little bit more of it and not feel so bad. And we'll blend it down like with the dessert fruit that I found where it was over 2,000 pounds off one tree. We
so there will be blends.
Like that.
Okay, so a lot of blend into like apple trees, the dessert kind of.
Yeah.
Macintosh maybe. Maybe, or
Macintosh is around. Cortland is around.
Wonderful trees to make cider with. The Mac, the Cortland. Yeah, if you know how
and
to
we've been
blend it.
able to work with some orchards now over the last couple of years, specifically since going to CiderCon, where I was finally able to network with a community. And so we've gotten Macintosh juice from the Bitterroot Valley in Montana. I know you went and cruised through that area.
Only virtually.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Only
really?
Virtually. Yeah.
Okay.
That was all virtual.
I was like, darn, she was in our neighborhood.
Oh, I would have called you up.
Yeah. Well, next time, where you get out there
I
physically.
sure hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we've been able to make some relationships. So what's been great is I've been able to make some blends that I don't actually have for you here, but we have one called Mountain Dry that uses the Bitterroot Max in concert with a small percentage of our crab apples, 10 to 20% of crab apple. And then also a lot of our other dessert fruit. The pet nat here is from dessert fruit that we harvest from within 3 hours of driving. So we've finally been able to make some more accessible ciders, and it's helped me feel better about not scaring people off of our brand with the more intense crab apple based ciders that we put in the smaller bottles and encourage people to drink them with food and
wild ferment ciders.
All wild ferment. I really think that. So Teton Pet Nat is dessert fruit, wild fermented, We don't add any sulfur of any kind at any point. I just realized that our pHs are all so low. Just in the last, that's why I asked about pH in the last
the
setting we were in there.
Yeah.
We see 3 often, and that's so low that it's almost a preservative of its. It is a preservative of its own. And then the chemistry of crab apples are just so ripe for wild fermentation and no sulfur because they possess the right things already.
They sure do.
And that's been really exciting because I didn't want to use sulfur anyways from the beginning. And the more we've explored those unique crabapple varieties, the less we realized it's a necessity, or would be a necessity potentially.
Yeah. So let's go down the line here. So that's a 750 ml bottle. That's a pet nut, so it's going to have a little bit of light bubbles in it.
Yeah.
Because it's like bottled condition.
It's pretty bubbly too, that one.
Oh, how exciting!
Yeah. It kind of I think it pushes up to the high end of the 2-bar that's allowed by regulators. And then next up would be the bitter local, and we named it after all the people who have lived in Jackson for too long and are annoyed by the tourism and get sad when there's no snow, and the bitter local attitude is a pervasive thing that I was actually born with and had to live elsewhere and move back to say, how could I be bitter about living in a place that I want to be? I used to be very upset with all the tourism and all my favorite places being discovered by people. And I had to leave and come back to realize I'm so glad so many people get to come to this area to then experience our region and then engage with the natural world and say, I want to care about this. And when I go home, I will care more about the natural world around me. So I've gone the backwards direction. I started as a bitter local and have become much more of a sweeter local. I guess.
You're digging it. I mean, you're like in your perfect spot right now.
And that one focuses on crabs that are bittersweet crabs. So low acidity, surprisingly.
Okay.
High Brix, 20 usually.
Yeah.
And then a good amount of tannin. You bite into it and it covers every square centimeter of your gums.
Yeah.
And so we started using those, but the acidity was, the pH was a little high, and we have so many other tart crabs. So ours is, I kind of think of it as like a European style bittersweet cider, but with a lot more acidity blended in from the other crab apples that grow, and actually that we harvest at the same time as that apple.
So that's a still cider.
No, that one's moderately bubbly. I'd say.
Moderately bubbly. Okay.
I'd say you got the most bubbly, medium bubbles,
bubble.
and then Kelly Street is as close to still as we get. Despite the corking cage, it's just I like pulling the cork out with my teeth, so I don't need a.
He is from Wyoming. Okay,
Yeah.
He is from Wyoming. Do not mess with the Wyoming.
And it's unsafe to open a bottle cap with your teeth. I've seen it done. It's not recommended. Cork is much softer. So, and the Kelly Street is named after the fact that we're harvesting pretty much in the town limits, and everything that goes into that blend is harvested from the city limits, and it's a huge diversity of apples from dessert, from a small amount of dessert to 20 different crab varieties that go in. Our favorite variety is in that one, the one we've grafted the most of. We call it High School Purple because it's a small, very purple apple that grows near the high school.
That's a perfect name for it.
High School Purple. Yeah. I'm sure it has another name,
Right.
but what we love about it is it's super
You know
high
exactly
tannin.
where it is, so that's a locator name.
And when I say it's time to go harvest it, everyone knows where we're going too. And our other blends are named after the areas. There's Rafter J, and then another one is called Red Canyon Nan. Nan is the lady who owns the orchard in Lander, Wyoming, which is about 3 hours away, and she lives in Red Canyon. And she's got maybe 100 trees left of an old orchard that was planted in the 1880s. All these different varieties that she knows a lot of the names, from everything from Wolf River to Rhode Island greening and russets, and so it's
and you harvest all those apples for her.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we make a cider because it was feeding the deer for 90 years. We make a cider every few years when they don't have a bad frost. That's just everything from that orchard goes in. So we try to be place-based, even though we don't have orchards of our own. And so that's why Kelly Street is basically to signify everything from the town of Jackson, including high school purple goes in there. And
Love that.
we love that one because it's so many different varieties. And I really believe that I love single varietal ciders, and they're very interesting for me, but I love biodiversity. I love that in the vegetable garden and in the orchard and in the cider. And so I love making blends with as many different things. And maybe that's just a result of the fact that I don't have much access to single varietal quantities.
But it it really seems like you've hit the perfect sweet spot for what you're doing. You don't have to manage an orchard per se. Other people are managing their land, and you get to go in and do an amazing service and then actually really focus on being a cider maker.
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. And lastly, we're marketing. We get to do our marketing when we go to all those homes.
Well, they all want to come out and get a bottle for themselves and for their family and friends and business relations.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's by being out there and by doing the work. It seems like a lot of work, and it is. But the way the business model I think does work is that we are able to engage with the community so much, and they've been supporting us from the very beginning, even in the off seasons and the slow times. And from there, our price point I think reflects how much effort that goes into the collection of everything. But at the same time, we hope it's not inaccessible. And I think because we have so many tourists that come to visit, they're willing to buy one bottle to take home and try. And I really hope that they get home and they say, this tastes like the wild place that I just went to visit. And so that's sort of the connection that I hope we're making with people who are only there for their once-in-a-lifetime trip to
Jackson Hole.
Jackson, yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been so much fun talking to you and hearing
likewise.
your story, man.
This is my favorite podcast.
Aw.
I can't tell you how many times I've had an opportunity to learn something new and be inspired. So it's an honor to be able to sit with you.
Oh, thanks, Ian.
Thanks again to Ian McGregor of Farmstead Cider, based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Check out their online store where you could purchase any one of their award-winning wild ferment dry ciders and taste the ancient glacial soils, the extreme sun, and cool nights, all combined to make Wyoming a fantastic place to grow, harvest, and taste unique cider apple varieties, including high tannin crab apples. I got that little piece off of their website, farmsteadciderwyo.com. This conversation has left me with that good feel, and if you want to check out the photo of Bear 399 with her cubs in that crabapple tree, go to ciderchat.com, episode 311, to check it all out at the show notes and to find links to Farmstead Cider in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Cider Chat is listener supported, so if it brings value your way, please do consider hitting the donate button at ciderchat.com or becoming a patron at the Cider Chat Patreon page, which is spelled Patreon. And with that, Ciderville, I leave you here. This is Rio Wind Caller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider, we like palms, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Oh yes, there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like palms, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason. reason.
There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
Oh yes, there
There
is.
is a reason why we drink it like this.
Oh yes, there is.
There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider.
Oh yes, we do.
We like palm.
Oh yes, we do.
We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There's a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh yeah.
We like cider.
Ba-da-da-dum.
We like palm.
Oh yes, we do.
We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!